Could we see a twin-jet Airbus A380 or a double-engine Boeing 747? The concept has been thrown around for years, but I think the market is now to build this type of aircraft. And in the next probably 10 to 15 minutes, I'm going to convince you that that's also the case. So first of all, why on earth would we ever want to see an Airbus A380 with twin engines? Well, let me go over the pros and cons of such a design. The first one is fuel efficiency. It's very obvious that twin jet engines burn way less fuel than quad engines like the existing 747 and Airbus A380. Imagine the cost of fuel per seat on board an Airbus A380 using only 2 engines. It would be able to cruise and get to other continents and make a boatload of money for airlines. And we know that that's exactly what the business that airlines are in. Also, there'd be significantly less maintenance for a jet with twin engines. As we know, an airline only makes money when the bird is in the sky, so having a plane that has 2 engines means that the mechanics can get through it and get it back up into the air as quickly as possible. We know how long it takes to repair 4 engines, and especially if one of the engines breaks down, then you need to get a replacement in. And that's why it's such a better idea to use an aircraft with twin jets. And of course there are weight and aerodynamic benefits on the fuselage. Because there is drag with every single object that sort of sticks out from the fuselage, like the nacelles where the engines are, having half of the amount means that the aircraft would fly a lot better. Plus, think about all the weight savings from these heavy engine components that you don't have on board the aircraft, increasing the fuel savings. And with only 2 engines, it means the aircraft is significantly safer. I know you're going to think like, wait, that means that there's sort of less points of safety if the aircraft engines were to fail, but that's exactly it. There's less things that can go wrong because there's only half the amount of engines, especially if we put on these brand new modern engines that have a stellar track record. Now, of course, it wouldn't be fair on me to talk about this without actually talking about sort of, the negatives of an Airbus A380 with only 2 engines. And that first one is that safety issue that I just mentioned. Yes, having less engines does mean there's less redundancy. If an Airbus A380 is flying, say, over Antarctica, and it's only got 2 engines and one of them goes out, you're in a whole bunch of trouble. Whilst if it has 4 engines, it can keep on flying. And that's where the ETOPS rules comes in, that still forbids some travel over Antarctica and other remote ocean regions, that only allow quad jet engines like the 747 and Airbus A380 to fly there. There is also something called the engine out thrust requirement. This is where an aircraft requires at least every engine to produce a certain amount of thrust for the entire airframe. On board an Airbus A380, this is 25% from each engine to obviously make 100% of the thrust required to fly, and with a twin jet, it's actually 50% each. The issue is that we don't really have the engine technology to reach 50% for an Airbus A380 from one engine. So that means that a twin jet engine would generally have around 700 kilonewtons of thrust per engine if it had 2, as opposed to 350 kilonewtons of thrust if it has 4. And that's one of the huge disadvantages, that we simply don't have that engine technology with this idea right now. But I have a solution, so stick with me. And I know I make it sound like we can just take 2 of the engines off the Airbus A380 or the 747 and call it a day, putting on the new, more powerful engines if we had them. But the actual structure of the aircraft is not designed for these heavy twin engines to sit at the forward, the middle sections there. If we swap them out for other engines, we're going to have some problems with the structure, redesigning the nacelle, the weight distribution of the wing, and it's something that these aircraft were simply not designed for. And that's not to mention the cost of redesigning this. Maybe a whole clean sheet concept would actually work a lot better, which is actually what the airline manufacturers, Boeing and Airbus, are doing. They're building twin jet engines instead of these quad engines, or trying to upgrade their existing aircraft. And on that cost requirement, I do want to harken back that airlines may not be very satisfied with this type of aircraft. Part of the advantage of having your fleet have quad engine aircraft like the 747 is that you can fly pretty much anywhere in the world. If we suddenly replace those aircraft with twin jet engines like the Airbus A380 with just 2 of them, then you're no longer going to be able to fly some routes. And also the FAA has to approve this new design, and they're going to be highly skeptical of an aircraft that has been sort of not even redesigned from the ground up. You're going to have to probably recertify it completely again from scratch, something that's going to cost you even more time and money. So is this just a far-fetched idea? Am I being crazy? Well, let's have a look at the different types of engine concepts that may actually solve all of these problems. So the first one would be an ultra-high bypass turbofan. This is a new engine that is currently being theorized and designed to be the next generation of engine technology. These engines are gigantic and use concepts such as carbon fiber blades to produce incredible amounts of thrust, around the 600 to 700 kilonewtons range. Currently, Rolls-Royce is working on something called the UltraFan that plans to go into this area, but until they give us something concrete, it's still a pie-in-the-sky idea. But we do know that eventually we'll crack the code and this new engine will come. The other idea is to improve geared turbofans. The idea is that a gearbox could be sufficiently designed to increase the fan speed, producing even more thrust without increasing weight or doing a total redesign of an engine. This concept could be that hidden gem that will massively improve the engines that could be used for an Airbus A380 or a 747. We could also see a hybrid or electric assisted propulsion. What this would be an integrated propulsion unit inside the airframe of this sort of new double-decker aircraft, which would assist the aircraft during takeoff, getting it up to the cruising altitude. This would probably be some sort of electrical thing using new battery technology that's more of a mystery black box that we probably wouldn't actually see, but giving it a boost at the right time could also be a solution as opposed to new engines. It would also be great for safety to have a different propulsion system that's just not these twin engines hanging under the wings. And of course, the last idea is the one that I talked about in my previous video, which is a tri-jet concept, having 2 massive engines with a smaller third engine for boosts, sort of based in the tail, to get the aircraft up into the sky, and that's where it switches off. Unless in the case of an emergency where they can switch it back on. Now, I know I kind of went into this saying like, oh, you know, the Airbus A380 with twin jets, but this idea also has its own merit if we turned it into a tri-jet, because it could achieve sort of fuel efficiencies around 20 to 30% more than the current Airbus A380, according to Airbus. So I really do think that that idea is also worth some consideration. But I've got a whole video on that right now on the channel that you can go and watch. So you're probably asking yourself, Nick, this all sounds really great, but why hasn't anybody done it? Well, actually, they kind of have thought about it multiple times. When you consider the development of the Airbus A380, if Airbus could have built it with twin jets, they probably would have. It would have been difficult to certify a 500-ton aircraft with only 2 engines, but it is something that the engineers would have considered because the Airbus A380 was built in an era of high fuel prices, so it was very much on their mind. We saw that Airbus switched away from the Airbus A340 to the Airbus A330, getting rid of those extra 2 engines to build this smaller twin jet, so it was very much on their mind to create this aircraft, but they still couldn't do it because they didn't have the engine technology at the time. And then when it came to Boeing, they were actually looking at a new concept of the 747, potentially with something with twin engines. However, they realized that smaller planes and going point to point rather than going hub to hub was the future of the airline industry and decided to switch to aircraft like the 787 and expand their line of Boeing 777s. Especially with the new Boeing 777X coming to the market, which can pretty much carry 747 passenger and cargo loads, it shows that they're probably on the right path. So Boeing never really seriously considered a twin-engine 747 design once the market showed that 300 to 400 passenger capacity aircraft with 2 engines was successful and the way forward. So both the major manufacturers have decided to not go in that direction. And when you see that the regulators like the FAA are very strict on building an aircraft that has 1 or 2 engines, you can see that them trying to build an even bigger plane with 2 engines that would have to fly on just 1 is a very hard thing to get certified. Because the FAA would pretty much just sit there and say, why don't you put on like an extra 1 or 2 engines just to make it safer for the public? I mean, you can write down in the comments right now if you like, would you actually fly on board a single-engined Airbus A380 as it limped through the sky? That is not a scenario that I would want to wish on anyone. So does that mean that the twin-jet double-decker aircraft concept is dead as a doornail? Well, not quite, because we also have 4 other innovations coming to the future that may actually get this aircraft concept across the line. The first one is open rotor engines, or the prop fan concept. Now, Boeing actually wanted to bring this to the market with the 747-500 concept absolutely ages ago. The idea is that if you could take off the nacelle around the engine and put on some absolutely gigantic fans, you would make a massive amount of thrust, allowing this giant aircraft to fly in the sky. And we're seeing a lot of research go back to this by building sort of prop aircraft with large fans, and we may see them even fly an aircraft as big as the 747 or Airbus A380 with this technology one day in the future. Hydrogen may be the key to this problem. As you know, hydrogen has more energy per liter of fuel, although it does take up more space than jet fuel. But this higher density fuel may allow for larger aircraft to fly for longer on only 2 engines. And because the aircraft has to be bigger to carry all this extra amount of fuel, you're pretty much going to get an aircraft the size of a 747 or Airbus A380 with only 2 engines. Now, this may not exactly work for passenger aircraft, but I could see this hydrogen being the solution for cargo carriers. So we could see these giant aircraft flying in our sky powered by hydrogen. And of course, if we're completely redesigning the airframe, we could also change the materials as well. Imagine making a composite airframe, maybe from some miracle technologies such as graphite or carbon nanotubes that weighed nothing, like the amount of like a feather or something like that. And now the airframe is doing all of the work, making the plane much lighter, allowing it to be much bigger and operate on just 2 engines. I think because we're seeing the 777X get away with a lot with its 2 engines and its sort of larger airframe size, I could easily see it scaled up to have 2 decks. And maybe that's a video I should do on the channel, where I talk about how many passengers can we fit on board the 777X. So watch this space. And lastly, I really feel like this one's cheating a little bit, but we could see the concept of twin jet move to twin engine, having 2 engines on board that power like 6 to 8 turbofans. So you see a distribution going along the wings that has like multiple, like 8 sort of propellers or 8 sort of fans along the length of the wing, maybe some pushes at the back, but it only has 2 engines powering all of these fans. This could mean tons more thrust with highly powerful engines to get this giant aircraft into the sky. But it does mean that we have shifted the definition away from twin jets to sort of twin power sources. So anyway, that's my idea. I think that the 747 and the Airbus A380 had such great passenger numbers and make so much money for the airlines, when they're full, of course, which is a whole nother argument that I bet somebody has already written in the comments without, watching the whole video. That's a whole nother topic to talk about the actual business model of these aircraft. But I do think that the ideas have some merit, and maybe one day in our lifetime, we'll see all these crazy technologies fold together again, and the Queen of the Skies will be reborn.